At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. You find me, Kieran, all chipper, chirpy, because it's grey, it's drizzly, there's just a whiff of autumn in the air. It's not long now to the 1st of October and I can start Christmas. And I'm here with my old friend, Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire, to discuss the news of the week in football finance. It feels like the summer's finally over, Kieran, and that's all it takes. I'm a shallow, vain man, but it's just a cloud. It's all it takes to make me happy. How are you? How's Finley? We've had lots of comments about Finley being antsy. Our last record.
He was, yes. Well, I've had to wear my dog walking trousers this morning. It's so wet. So autumn is definitely here, but he loves it. He goes straight into all the streams and comes back home covered in mud, which doesn't necessarily go home. It doesn't necessarily go down particularly well domestically, but great morning so far. Yeah,
just a little insight there, everybody, into the difference in the environment in which I live and Kieran lives. He's got streams. And apologies to any Australian listeners, by the way, who are about to go in to summer and are very unhappy about it. Big story to start with, Kieran. Big words from a big man. Todd Boehly has made a few splashes this week, shall we say?
Yes. He was interviewed by some sort of New York, American talk show host. And he's not been involved in football for very long, but he thinks we've got things that we can learn. And the first of those, and I don't want to dismiss everything, because we don't want to be sort of, football fans are innately conservative, but he's made a few suggestions. One of which is to address the lack of funding for grassroots football. And this, he says, is to have a match between the North and the South. Says it works in Major League Baseball. It works in American sports. You have an all-star game at the end of the season. And I think my initial reaction, and I think it was possibly not the only one, is who would watch this? But perhaps I'm being wrong. I personally couldn't be bothered, and I suspect you probably couldn't be bothered either. It wouldn't register on us. But it could be, so it could come in for demand in from sort of the football tourist market, in the sense that they get an opportunity to see Virgil van Dijk and Bruno Fernandes and Haaland, and play against some of the best players from London and the South. Where this leaves the Midlands, I'm not quite sure.
Well, I was going to say that, Kieran, because for me, as you know, the North starts around Streatham Hill, basically. Anything north of that is the North, as far as I'm concerned, and Watford as a last resort. Whereas in America, of course, they've got a clearly definable line. They've got the Mason-Dixon line, which says which is north and which is south. And this strikes me as one of those ideas that would suddenly take place in Saudi Arabia, for example, or Singapore as an exhibition game during the summer. But it's a strange one, isn't it? But he says, well, we have it, so you've got to have it.
Yes, yeah. And he says, in the States, they have it on a Monday and a Tuesday, and it raises $200 million. It wouldn't raise a huge amount of money. I'm not convinced that the viewing figures would be significant, because how many people watch the I still call it the Charity Shield, but I know it's sort of the Community Shield. It doesn't attract a huge amount of interest. Yes, it will be shown. It's a curiosity. The players won't be treating it that seriously either. Either it's at the end of the season and they're looking forward to their holidays, or it's at the start of the season or the start of the season, and nobody wants to get injured because they've got the real football matches taking place. So that was one of his comments. The other one of his comments, which I think has sort of gone under the radar, and this is something, which we've discussed ourselves in the past, is some form of playoffs. And I think he was talking about playoffs in respect of the bottom four. And, could this be extended to the fourth Champions League place has always been my view. And then all of a sudden, when you get to that final match of the season, you've probably got 16 or 17 clubs who genuinely got something to play for. Because if you have the bottom two clubs do get relegated, the next four go into playoffs to see who's relegated, and then at the top three automatically go into the Champions League, and you've got some playoffs similar to what we see in rugby league. It could have some merit. So that one went under the radar. I think very much the focus on the North versus South, which I don't see a lot of traction for. But I think you're absolutely right. As an exhibition match taking place outside of the UK, I think most of us would just go and shrug, and and in your case, concentrate on avoiding the sun.
Yeah, that playoff idea. I've often advocated the fact that maybe the third bottom team in the Premier League should be in the playoffs with the three teams in the Championship, so they get a chance to stay up. But if you're trying to suggest to Premier League owners that the team that finishes 7 places off the bottom of the Premier League still has a chance of being relegated for a playoff, you can't see that happening. But he also, Kieran, well, I suppose you could see it happening if enough American owners come in to make a majority in the Premier League. But he also suggested very strongly that he was looking to turn Chelsea into a sort of Man City multi-club model. He's got his eye on a couple of other clubs already and wants to extend that.
Yes, and I think we've already seen some reports. We're recording this on Wednesday morning, and I think already there's talk about some involvement in Portugal, and he's seen the benefits that have arisen in respect of Manchester City. His comments again sort of focused on this is a way of farming out youth talent and keeping an eye on it, which is a benefit. The downside of that is what happens if your Portuguese side is successful and gets into the Champions League. But that's exactly the same with the Manchester City model.
I think everyone's going to have to take my word on this, but Portugal sounds exactly the sort of thing that Bob Hope would say to Bing Crosby in a musical when they see a good-looking woman from the Iberian Peninsula. Wow, what a Portugal! Less exotic than Portugal, but not by much. Burnley are facing an EFL investigation over who actually owns the club. And to an outsider, Kieran, this seems like the sort of thing you shouldn't need to investigate.
Yes, so this is a story I picked up from the Mail. And I've got to be honest, having delved into it in a bit more detail, I think they're using a bit of a license to embellish things here. So what we have is, first of all, a ridiculously complicated structure in respect of Burnley Football Club. There is Burnley Football and Athletic Limited, which in turn is owned by Burnley FC Holdings Limited, which in turn is controlled by Calder Vale Holdings Limited, all in the UK. They in turn are controlled by a company called Velocity Sports, which is based in Jersey. Now, Jersey has a different set of rules when it comes to being transparent. So this is the issue which is being brought up by the Mail. Velocity Sports, in turn, is owned by a company called ALK Capital LLC, which is based in the US, along with Velocity Sports Partners LLC. And I go, why these huge degrees of layers of complication here? And I think this is what's got some people disturbed. So I had a look at the EFL handbook. They very kindly sent me a copy of the handbook, saying, what exactly a club's supposed to be doing here. And the EFL handbook is very clear, and I think you've got to give the EFL some credit here, is that they say that according to their regulations, every club on its website now has to have a statement of ownership. And if you go to the Burnley website, it says that ultimately Alan Pace owns just over 50%, and there's two guys called Michael Smith and Stuart Hunt, and they own about a sixth of the company each. So that takes us to 80-odd%, and I think some of the former owners have a few shares as well. But it does muddy the waters, and you can see why perhaps eyebrows have been raised. But I think the article is being a bit harsh. Similar. We've been talking about Morecambe on the show a few times recently, and they're up for sale. But again, they've got this ownership statement on their website, and all clubs, I think, as part of the EFL's attempt to improve transparency and address issues of governance, are now having to do this, and also they're being monitored, which perhaps wasn't always the case historically.
Whenever you hear Kieran talk about, as you say, layers of ownership, and it tends to be in football, or it tends to be on documentaries about who owns property in central London, the implication is always that it's for shady reasons. Is that the case, or is this a standard business practice elsewhere?
It can be a bit of both. Trying to get, it's a bit like 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, in that you have to start to put together the model. It's a bit like you remember the Mustroika dolls that I'd get in Moscow. Everything sort of fitted inside everything else. Now, sometimes it's done for taxation reasons. Sometimes it's done for international separation reasons, where people don't necessarily want to express who the ultimate owners are. I failed to see why EFL and Premier League football clubs should be registered in the Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands. It doesn't improve transparency, that's for sure. So there can be, in the eyes of the owners, legitimate tax planning reasons. And remember, tax planning is another word for paying less tax. But it doesn't help. And of course, it does leave the people involved open to accusations.
And again, this is only something I've picked up from half-heartedly watching documentaries when there's no football on telly, or documentaries about Anne Boleyn. But this business of being registered in the Cayman Islands or in Jersey, do they need a physical presence there, the company, or is it as simple as tacking a brass plaque on a wall?
It is nameplate ownership. And it is very common in Jersey, Isle of Man, BVI, Cayman Islands. In the US, they normally use the state of Delaware because the US has both federal and state laws. Delaware, famously or infamously, has the most relaxed disclosure rules. So therefore, we find huge numbers of companies from the United States deciding to register their activities in Delaware, because it means that they have to disclose less information. And part of me says, well, given a choice between disclosing more information or less information, I can understand why companies don't want to disclose any more information than they have to. But from a perspective of transparency, and also from a perspective of what we've always said, football is more than just a limited company business. It is a community business. And perhaps if we had an independent football regulator, as suggested by Tracy Crouch, then this could be an issue which would be addressed.
Well, you got that in early. A lot of our bingo players have been able to. They've probably gone already. Now you've done that already. This was a bit of a head scratcher, Kieran, for the more simple amongst us in football, and you had to explain to me why this was able to happen when the transfer window is closed. but Diego Costa has signed for Wolves this week.
Yes, and Diego Costa, he's only 33. I thought I thought he was 3 or 4 years older than that. So he's signed for Wolves. I don't know if people have seen the release of the video when he signs, where he is by Diego Costa standards looking not entirely confident at being surrounded by a bunch of wolves on leads. But the reason why he was able to sign a contract outside of the window was that he did have a contract with Athletic Mineiro of Brazil, which expired in December 22. So therefore, he's a free agent. And free agents can join football clubs at any point in the year because he didn't have when we talk about a football transfer, we are talking about the transfer of the registration certificate of the player from either domestically from one football club to another or internationally from effectively one football association to another. So in the case of Diego Costa, because his contract expired in December 22, he didn't have a registration certificate to transfer, and therefore he's exempt from the transfer window rules.
Right. I don't suppose there's any indication of how many free agents there are floating around football at any one time, because it seems like a bit of a loophole, doesn't it, transfer window-wise?
Well, it is and it isn't, because if those players were any good, you would have thought that somebody would have offered them a contract already.
Right. Okay.
And sort of at the end of each season, I think the PFA, they say on average around about 700 of our members each season are out of contract, and then it quite often happens with goalkeepers that that they'll get to September, October, a goalkeeper gets an injury, and if the goalkeeper's who's been released is still without a job, if they've kept themselves fit, they find themselves on the bench, and so on. Remember famously, which player was it? Wasn't it Leicester were playing Wickham in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup?
Yes,
yeah.
I'm
trying to think of the name of the player, but he ended up getting quite a reputation on the back of being available.
Yeah. If only there was some way we could check that, Kieran, while we were recording. You have to congratulate Wolverhampton Wanderers, though, for laying their hands on that many Wolves at short notice.
Yes.
Actual Wolves, because if a player signed for Palace this week, we'd struggle to get more than one Eagle, I'm guessing. Whereas Brighton, it'd be easy for you because all you need to do is hold out a chip, and then every seagull on the south coast would be coming along. Wrexham's application to stream home games, both domestically and internationally, has been declined. The streaming, we know from Andy Holt in particular at Accrington, that streaming games is controversial at that level. So why did they want to do it, and why has it been declined, Kieran?
Right. Well, the reason why Wrexham have asked to do this is that they've got two Hollywood owners presently on Disney Plus. That they are now they started streaming the program Welcome to Wrexham. It's great. It's popcorn TV. They're very personable. There's lots of interviews with fans and people around the club, and it's a genuinely engaging program. It's only on for half an hour. And as I said, I've got an affection for Wrexham. In terms of football clubs nearly going out of business, and I used to run a double glazing company in Wrexham, which had gone into administration. And when we were short staffed, I'd ended up on the production line, which was fantastic. It was really good fun. So it's a program which is increasing the profile of the club due to the owners who are very much involved in the show. Sean Harvey, is sort of the advisor to the club. And he comes on and introduces himself as being the former chief executive of both Bradford City and Leeds United. He didn't mention that both clubs went into administration twice. I guess that didn't quite make the edit, but I'll always remember that. So what's happened? On the back of Wrexham now having a bigger profile, their front of shirt sponsorship has gone from the local, local car hire company to TikTok. So they've certainly increased their profile. They wanted to leverage on the back of that through streaming matches to expand the fan base. And they put that to the National League, and the National League said, no, can't be done. We've got an existing deal with BT. So they put the kibosh on that. But there is going to be a meeting on the 15th of September between all club owners where the issue of streaming is now going to be discussed. So whilst it's been rejected, I think at board level, it could go into the sort of more of a broader domain for discussion and perhaps a vote be taken. I think the big question, and certainly I've seen both sides of the argument put forward as far as the EFL clubs are concerned, is if we do sell streaming passes, who gets the money? Yeah. There's always two issues. There is, do we have a pie? How big is the pie? And then how are we going to cut the pie? And that tends to be the issue upon where people fall out. And certainly from Andy Holt's perspective, he takes the view that if Accrington have got a match at home and they're playing Portsmouth or they're playing Ipswich and so on, if Portsmouth and Ipswich are selling passes, well, why can't Accrington have a proportion of that money? And that does seem to have some validity, and also it stops the bigger clubs accelerating too far ahead of the smaller clubs, and it maintains some form of competitive balance within the division. So it's a case of how you split it. So we've said before, streaming is the way forward. Streaming, don't be King Canute when it comes to things like this. It is a way of getting direct to consumer as far as the club and the product is concerned. But remember that we want football to be a competitive sport at the same time.
So does the BT deal include streaming rights, or are National League games not streamed? Is the only way you can watch them just wait and hope that they're going to be on BT at the weekend?
Yeah, I think it is determined by BT now. Right. What rights BT have, because I think they have effectively a match of the day style show as well, where they show the highlights from individual matches. So if they've played for all of that, and people are saying, well, actually we're going to watch the matches live, and therefore we're not going to. It's a bit like me and you. Even if we go to a match, we get home in time for match of the day. And if we've won, because I don't watch match of the day if we've lost.
Neither do I.
If we've won, we'll still watch it. Now, if will people be willing to watch the BT deal? If you're Altrincham and you're playing a match down south and you've won, you might want to watch it on the BT show. But if you've paid for a pass, you might not, and therefore BT might be concerned about the impact it has on their viewing figures.
I'm always baffled by people who watch their team lose on a highlights program. People say to me, well, why don't you watch the other games and then just switch over to something else when Palace are on and then switch back? And I go, well, A, Palace will be on last anyway. We always are. And B, why would I wouldn't even want my eyes resting on any program that was going to show Palace losing at some stage. Now, I don't believe, Kieran, in our nearly 3 years of recording this pod, that we've ever actually travelled to the Isle of Man. But there's been a big issue this week. It became quite public that FC Isle of Man have been very criticised by their fans over a rise in match day prices and season ticket prices.
Yes, they put up the price of a ticket to, I think, £10 to adults.
No, I think it's £5 to £7, I think it was.
Was it? Right, okay.
I believe, yeah.
And they say we are a successful club. We've got income of £360,000 a year, but we're still losing money. And the reason why they're losing money, and remember, we've spoken to the people at Jersey Bulls who have come on the show as well, is that if you are one of those island clubs and you want to be part of the football pyramid, you're going to come up against a lot of resistance from other clubs. So, in the case of Jersey Bulls, when clubs come to Jersey Bulls have to pay their transport fees. And I think it's broadly similar in the Isle of Man. So they're currently in the Northwest Counties Football League, which is the same division as Bury AFC. And they want to enter the FA Cup in 2023-24, so therefore they need to be part of the pyramid structure. They've got ambitions, and that's all well and good. The reason why they put up their prices is their explanation is that it's all down to transport costs. Transport costs represent 80% of the total that it's costing them, and of course, transport costs have gone through the roof. Following what's happened in Ukraine and the increase in general energy prices and fuel prices, that's impacted upon charter flights. We've had issues with flights, as we were discussing only last week. And then if you're hiring a coach as well, those prices have gone up because of fuel prices. So FC Isle of Man said, well, we're simply passing on those costs to you, the fan, and the fans are saying, well, we're being screwed left, right, and centre from general inflation. Ultimately, attending a football match is discretionary expenditure. I don't like to use the word luxury. For me, football's never been a luxury. But it is something which we do ultimately have a choice. We've got to feed and heat the house. But that has certainly provoked dissent, and I think it was a very public display of unhappiness, which was coming across on social media.
I had flight issues when I went to the Isle of Man. I travelled over with two other comedians to do a gig, and I can only describe these comedians as more exuberant than me, Kieran, in terms of their comedy and their everyday demeanour, and they thought it would be hilarious to mimic the stewardess who was doing the safety announcement. Very small plane. They thought it would be hilarious to mime her actions and the actions of the steward at the back. And then halfway down the runway, the plane stopped, and the pilot said, "I'm very sorry, we're going to have to delay takeoff because two so-called comedians disrupted even now." And I couldn't stand up and say I didn't do it. I was just sitting there quietly paying attention. So I wasn't. No one ever does. But it was a very uncomfortable atmosphere. And they decided it's probably best if we got off the plane last.
Right.
It's an interesting place. And if anybody from FC Isle of Man is listening, we would be really interested to hear from you to discuss this issue, because we have discussed the economics of island football before, as you say, with Jersey Bulls, but this one's particularly struck a chord with fans, certainly with the Isle of Man fans. So we would love to hear your take on the story and about life in general, football in the Isle of Man. Kazoo, Kieran, who've got not short of money, judging by the amount they spend on advertising in this country, online car retailer, currently sponsors of Aston Villa and the EFL, are pulling out of sponsoring clubs in France, Germany, Italy and Spain.
Yes. So I dug out Kazoo's accounts, and on sales of £160 million last year, they lost 90 million.
Oh.
So that is quite spectacular. Now, normally you say that when a business is starting, it can have cash flow challenges. It's not particularly well organised, and that's why you have investors who are prepared to absorb those losses. But it has announced recently that it's going to have quite a significant restructuring. It did, clearly you cannot watch commercial television without Ryland popping up every 15 minutes to advertise the virtues and extol the benefits of Kazoo in that particular area of the car market. But they've announced 750 job losses, which is very sad news for all the people involved. They did start off in the UK, and then they very, very quickly went into the rest of the Europe. And we often talk about when you're looking at business setup, don't do too much too young. To quote the specials, and I think that's perhaps what they have done. So they've now pulled out of the whole of Europe, but in the intervening period, they sponsored clubs in France, in Lille and Marseille, Italy, Bologna, France, Freiburg, and Valencia in Spain. So where they stand with those particular deals, we don't know whether they've paid them for this season in advance or not. But it's pointless. It's pointless advertising a product where you're not actually selling your broader services. So, it's messy, and you just hope from first of all, as people are losing their jobs, let's got to keep a look on the broader things here. But you hope that the clubs aren't going to be losing out on this as well, because trying to find sponsors once the season starts, it isn't always easy. And I think Nottingham Forest are probably going through some of those teething issues as well.
I spent a few hours in the company of Terry Hall, the specials. He was one of the most attractive men I've ever seen in my life, but I would not describe him as knockabout. I doubt if the phrase "laugh a minute" has ever been used by Terry Hall or his friends.
I do think that Ghost Town is the greatest ever number one in terms of right song at right time. I remember that. Yeah. And it just reflected where we were as a country, as well as being a fantastic song in its own right, of course.
Wow, that first album, the Too Much Too Young album, was fantastic, brilliant album. Let's not get diverted down that avenue. Kieran will be here for a long time. Our next three questions, our next three news stories, rather, to finish the pod, almost, take us to Spain, and in their own way, they all illustrate that Spanish football seems to be going through some kind of existential financial crisis, if you can have a crisis that is both existential and financial. The first story is that Antoine Griezmann is playing less than half an hour a game for Atletico, so the club can avoid paying a €40 million fee to Barcelona.
Yes. And we'll probably be talking about agents a little bit later, but this is a classic case of somebody somewhere has not looked at the small print. So you're absolutely right. What's happened here is that Griezmann initially went to Barcelona for £107 million in 2019. Didn't work out. And therefore they put him on they returned him to Athletic on a 2-year loan with an obligation to buy. And we've spoken about these obligations to buy. And that obligation to buy was as follows, was that if he played for more than 45 minutes in over half of the games over 2 seasons, then that triggered the €40 million fee. So he last played a full match last April. And what Atletico Madrid had done, they said, well, if we pay him for less than 45 minutes, we could save ourselves an awful lot of money. So Barcelona say, oh, that's a bit immoral. That's a bit unethical. I'm thinking, hold on, unethical coming from Barcelona Football Club. So, there's and there's no irony, of course. So they initially were threatening. They were threatening Atletico Madrid with a lawsuit. And our friend Nick DeMarco said, always try to avoid lawsuits. Negotiation is far better than litigation in terms of A, it's quicker, and B, it's a lot cheaper. So I think there are now negotiations between the two clubs, and it looks as if to save this somewhat farcical situation, because he's a fantastic player, that Barcelona might now accept 25 million, and if he'll sign for them on that full contract at the end of the season. So it does show that if you don't look at the terms and conditions of any contract, it can come back to bite you in the bum. And this is very much what's happened here as far as Barcelona is concerned. Why on earth they agreed to such a deal is beyond me. But I think I could say the same about some of the other contracts they've signed over the course of this summer.
Yeah, we will definitely be talking about agents, Kieran, before we finish, as I can see it written at the bottom of my screen. It's the last story. It is, as you say, farcical, Kieran, but also it's very unfair on the player for a start. I mean, it could affect his international career if for example, they were to decide that he can't possibly be match fit if he's only playing half a game. And we always forget the human being at the bottom. Yeah, I mean, of course, he's a very well-paid human being, but he's still a human being who wants to play football. And that's what lies at the bottom of all these financial stories that we sometimes need to remind ourselves. Still with Barcelona, their spending cap has been increased by 800 million euros after La Liga accepted the use of payday loans. And I reckon, Kieran, like myself, a lot of our listeners will be thinking, well, hang on, they didn't seem to have been shy about spending money before this cap was increased. So what difference is this making?
Well, what's happened is that La Liga have now given them their spending cap for the season. So this will have probably an impact more when it comes to January than anything else. Originally, Barcelona were given a negative wage cap of 144 million euro. And people going,
sorry, Kieran, sorry to interrupt. Just for newer listeners, would you like to just briefly explain how the spending cap works in La Liga?
Sure. It's so they're called La Liga cost controls, and the way that it works is that what you have to do is that you have to submit to the bean counters at La Liga a budget for the upcoming season, and this says this is how much money we expect to earn. This is how much money we are spending on non-football things, and in the case of Barcelona, it's a big club. It's got significant overheads. This is how much money we are committed to paying over the course of the next 12 months in the course of A, transfer fees, and B, loan repayments. Barcelona were up to their ears in debt. And I've said on many occasions, debt's not a problem provided you can make the payments on the due dates. In the case of Barcelona, it had a load of loans which were due for repayment. So Barcelona's, as a result of that, it said, this is our income. We've got huge amounts of loans and we've got lots of non-football costs. And whatever's left over is your football budget in terms of effectively transfer fee, amortization and wages. And when you plug those figures into the calculator, it came out as minus 144, which was a bit like me 3 days after payday. Barcelona decided to do two things. First of all, they went and increased their revenues. So this is through the use of these. We mentioned this before. They've got four what they refer to as economic levers, but they are in fact payday loans. Yeah. What Barcelona have done is that they've sold broadcasting rights. They've sold some of the commercial rights for the next, sometimes 20, 25 years. And they've got money now, so that's boosted their revenue now. But it's going to decrease their revenue going forwards. And then they've cut their loan repayments by rescheduling the loans, so they've kicked the problem further down the road. It's not something that I would recommend in terms of financial common sense. But it's sort of they will argue that it's sort of a needs must, and that's allowed them to sign Lewandowski and Rafinha and these other players. Didn't stop them from losing to Bayern Munich last night when Lewandowski went back. So their wage cap has gone from minus 144 to plus 650 million euro. But to me, this indicates that if you've got rules and they've not been thought through, it can lead to people making decisions which are not in anybody's long-term interest. And that's what Barcelona have done. They've sold the family silver. They've kicked their debts down the road. How is that good for the sustainability of the club?
I mean, this is a very unlikely scenario, Kieran, because I'm not an accountant. I don't speak Spanish. And I doubt if I've got 25 years left. But Barcelona's accountant in 25 years' time is just going to go, what? What did they do? Why did they do that? Yes. And still in Spain, La Liga president Javier Tebas is going to report the Premier League to UEFA for causing what he calls transfer inflation.
Yeah. Everybody likes a snitch, don't they? This is. I can only describe this as textbook Tebas because what he has, he's obsessed with other football clubs and other competitions rather than perhaps focusing on his own. The Premier League is very successful. And historically, Spain has been very successful. Yeah. And also, if you take a look at Real Madrid's Champions League success over the course of last decade, Spain is still very successful. You only got to go back to sort of, I think, was it the period something like 2013 to 2015? I think they won 7 out of 9 European competitions. But it's very clear now, and I think this is one of the issues he is referring to. It's not necessarily a pop at the biggest clubs, but if you finish 7th or 8th in the Premier League and you compare the revenue of that club to the club which is 7th or 8th in La Liga, they're light years apart. So Barcelona and Real Madrid can compete at the ultimate end with Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, and so on. Manchester City, of course. But once you drop out of that top tier, I don't want to call them also rans because they're not. Because if you support Betis or you support Osasuna, that club means just as much to you as if you support one of the bigger clubs. But those clubs which don't get the attention earn substantially less money than the clubs, say Newcastle, Wolves, Leicester, and so on, who are sort of what we might refer to as mid-tier clubs here in England, which means that Wolves and Leicester and Villa and Palace and Brighton as well, we can sign players from the rest of Europe, which the rest of Spain can't afford. So he says, well, the Premier League's been too successful. It's on the back of that, it's generating more money, and that's not fair. What I would say to Javier Tebas is part of the reason why the Premier League is so successful is because relatively it is far more democratic than La Liga itself, in the sense that the gap between the clubs finishing the mid-table and the top, it is a noticeable gap, but we can still afford decent players. So, when Palace are playing Chelsea or Arsenal or Liverpool, you still think you got a chance. And that's far less likely to arise. In Spain, football's too much of a procession. It's got 2.5 clubs going to win La Liga each season, and that, when you're trying to sell those rights, makes it more difficult.
I'm going to pause here, Kieran, before I ask to get you to talk about the last news item, because something's just occurred to me, basically regarding the demographic of our audience. And I realised that I referred earlier to the Specials, and I said that the Too Much Too Young album. It is, of course, the album from which that song was taken, which is one of my favourite songs. The album's called Specials. So I don't want hundreds of middle-aged men shouting at me. So I don't mind you getting amortisation wrong, but you've got the name of the Specials' first album wrong. I hope I've made that clear. It's a terrible thing, Kieran, when that's all you're really worried about, remembering kits from the 70s and making sure you get bad names from the 80s right. The news stories about agents, Kieran, as the more clever of our listeners will have gleaned already. A FIFA report shows that football agents earned £430.8 million in the last transfer window. £430.8 million, Kieran, for agents.
Yes. So FIFA always put out a report each year, and agents are the pantomime villains of football, who sort of act as a lightning rod for an awful lot of criticism. I've been in touch with our friend Jonathan Booker with regards to this, and he's saying, well, the reason why FIFA are putting this out and also highlighting the figure is that FIFA are trying to distract people from perhaps some of the ways that FIFA is run and focus instead on agents. These figures are paid by clubs. These figures are in some cases paid by players. FIFA is trying to introduce a new set of rules which would limit agent fees, and that's quite populist in approach, and you can understand that because for reasons I've never quite understood. You work in the entertainment industry. You have an agent. I moved house recently. I used an agent, and I didn't. Yeah, that's what everybody does. Everybody in entertainment, everybody moving a house uses agents, and we don't have an issue with it. When it comes to football and footballers, there seems to be this element of resentment, and certainly there are examples such as the Paul Pogba transfer from Juventus to Manchester United, where Raiola made an awful lot of money on that deal. Do agents make a fortune in respect of most deals? They don't. What would we have if we didn't have agents? Well, and I'm not here to try to promote that industry. It would be more difficult to get players to move because agents do act as a lubricant within the industry to facilitate movements, especially from one country to another. They defend the rights of their players because football players are not necessarily hugely financially literate, and I'm not falling down that rabbit hole of football players are thick, because they're not. But they won't necessarily know market values, for example. They won't know potentially the benefits of their intellectual property rights, and a good agent would be able to negotiate on behalf of the client to generate for them, and they take a slice of the action on the back of that. So that's where we are. It is a large sum of money. It does cover global trade as far as and remember, this 430 million only applies to international agents, international football transfers. So it excludes domestic ones. So there will be figures on top, but I think it's not necessarily showing the whole story because FIFA are now trying to position themselves as being the as being the sheriff of football and solving the problems of agents. If the FIFA proposals go ahead, which will cap agents' fees, I'm pretty certain what we will see is more clandestine payments being made, which isn't good for the overall governance and transparency of the game.
First of all, Kieran, I think you'll find that for a lot of us, Brighton are the pantomime villains of football. But it's strange when you talk to players and people in the game, they don't have an issue with agents. They're bemused by the fact that I would guess 99% of football supporters, as you say, they hate the idea of agents and they don't mind at all. I find they haven't got an issue with players being paid a lot of money, but they do have an issue with the agents taking a commission for doing so. And I suspect football clubs are rather like my industry. Broadcasters, production companies don't like dealing with those few people who haven't got an agent. Most people who decide they can do it themselves then change their minds because the authorities really don't want to deal direct with somebody. So even my client, I write, and have I got news for you? And I've done for a long time, but you still get a new contract for every series. It's 16 pages long. And there's all sorts of whereas and untos and clauses that involve, your behaviour, their behaviour, repeat fees and whatever. And I don't understand it. And that's why I've got an agent who tells me it's all fine, or she says, well, actually they're trying to change this bit, this percentage. Are you okay with that? And otherwise, because I'm sure clubs worry the same way as broadcasters and production companies do. There's too much temptation for them then to take the piss out of the footballer, basically. If they think, well, we're dealing with somebody who doesn't know, as you say, isn't literate. And I'm intelligent, but I don't understand contracts or the finances. I couldn't possibly do it myself. And I'd be fair game for any unscrupulous production company that says, right, well, let's take advantage of that fact. So it baffles me a little why football fans are so distrustful of agents. I think what didn't help, Kieran, I've been thinking about this actually since I saw the story. If you remember Eric Hall from the 80s, younger people should look him up because he was a fascinating, flamboyant character. He worked in the music industry, decided that football was coming out of a period of doldrums and started to represent a lot of players. But he was a classic cliche agent, big coat, cigar, he had a catchphrase. And I think people, certainly of our generation, older fans, immediately think of him. And he was somebody who boasted about getting players extra money, but the players loved him because he was, he would, anything they did, he would get the money for. So of course they liked him. So it's an interesting dynamic. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that's very kind of you. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as always, folks, thank you very much for the support from the show. You keep us on our toes. We do appreciate your engagement with us. Patreon is one way of doing that for as little as £1 a month plus VAT. Let's say now. The other way you can do that is to go onto your podcast app and leave us a review. If you could give us 5 stars, it helps us in the charts. We're regularly in the top 30 for sports charts in the UK, which for a niche show we don't have glamorous production companies behind us, is something we're pretty proud of. It doesn't matter what you say as far as the review is concerned. I think it's mainly based on the number of stars you give. So you could say, if you so desired, you'd rather have the show presented by little Jimmy Osmond and Todd Bowley, who appear to have the same hairdresser, than myself and Kevin. And it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to us.
Producer Guy, I'm not the one who said you weren't glamorous. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.